What happens when real history meets alternative history in the War of Spanish Succession? This is the first of a 4-part series examining the 4 wars of the board game Imperial Struggle and how altered events could have shifted the balance in Europe. This is Legendary Tactics. In this first installment of a historical analysis on the battles of Imperial Struggle, we examine the European and global ramifications of the War of Spanish Succession from 1701 to 1717. Further, we will show how this war utilized and was brought up in GMT's game Imperial Struggle, and ways in which the French and English powers could better their odds of successfully navigating this first tumultuous war. To understand the context of the War of Spanish Succession, we need to frame the conversation from the lens of the 2 main players of the game, France and England. Admittedly, the Habsburg Austrian Empire was also a key player, but we will primarily focus on the French and English as they arguably gained the most from its aftermath. What was the War of Spanish Succession? The war itself started with the death of Charles II in November of 1700. Having no heirs, Charles willed the throne of Spain, Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou. This was by no means a smooth transition of power. In fact, upon the death of Charles II, the Austrian Emperor Leopold I made claim that his son, Karl VI, was the rightful king. The balance of power on the European continent was held in the balance, with the scales tilting heavily towards the French if Louis's grandson took the throne. England clearly did not want Spanish lands in the hands of a king from Louis's line, and thus sided with the Habsburg. With the Act of Union of 1707, the joining of Scotland to English lands, this meant Scotland was now brought in on the English side. Joining the English and Habsburgs was Prussia and the Dutch Republic. These countries formed the Grand Alliance. Joining the French to fight the Grand Alliance were the Spanish, who in the interim had put Philip on the throne, along with Hungary and Bavaria. Looking at the countries involved, it seemed inevitable that French was destined for defeat, yet they were able to hold fast and repel Grand Alliance forces and cause a stalemate. Until, in 2 key years, 1705 and 1711, which saw the Habsburgs, 2 emperors die, meaning that Karl VI was now the Holy Roman Emperor. The war was largely fought over balance of power, and the English did not want a Habsburg running Europe any more than the hated French. This caused both sides to sue for peace, and with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1715, the war was all but over. French retained Philip of Anjou as King of Spain, but in return they ceded many colonies to the English, including Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Hudson Bay, St. Kitts, Gibraltar, and Minorca. These French concessions would ultimately cement English naval domination on the high seas for several hundred years. So who was the winner of the war? It is often said that history is mired in shades of gray. This war is clearly one example of just that. Neither the French or English escaped getting exactly what they hoped for. In the game Imperial Struggle, we see this conflict played out as either the French or English. It is your turn to revise the historical narrative using your understanding of the events and how to exploit them best to your advantage. Could a French domination of the Grand Alliance been possible? Could the English have found a way to subdue the French, made gains into Spain, and retaken the ports they gained through the eventual war's result? Let's take a look now at some of the event cards, the wars, and personalities you'll have to contend with in an Imperial Struggle to do just that. The War of Spanish Succession was broken into 4 main categories: Central Europe, Spain, Queen Anne's War, and the Jacobite Rebellion. In Central Europe, France and the Grand Alliance battled to a draw in many wars, and with a variety of countries changing allegiances. France itself was never actually threatened during the Spanish Succession, nor was England. Spain. In Spain, the Grand Alliance, led by England, pushed to actually holding Madrid at some points in the war, but was eventually pushed back by the Spanish and French. Queen Anne's War. This was the second in a series of French and Indian wars fought in England's 13 colonies in North America. It happened during the reign of Anne, Queen of Great Britain. In Europe, it is generally viewed as the American theater of the War of Spanish Succession. In the Americas, it is more commonly viewed as a standalone conflict. Jacobite Rebellion. The Jacobite Risings, also known as the Jacobite Rebellions, were a series of uprisings, rebellions, and wars in Great Britain and Ireland occurring between 1688 to 1746. These uprisings had the aim of returning James II of England and the VII of Scotland and his descendants of the House of Stuart to the throne of England. Having looked at the four primary wars happening during the War of Spanish Succession, let's look now at some of the cards in Imperial Struggle that are relevant to this theater. Acts of Union. The Acts of Union card represents the event where Scotland became part of England. Great Northern War, a conflict in which a coalition led by the Tsardom of Russia successfully contested the supremacy of the Swedish Empire in Northern, Central, and Eastern Europe. Alberoni's Ambition. This card was inspired by Giulio Alberoni, who was an Italian cardinal and statesman in the service of Philip V of Spain. He was known for being a remarkable soldier. Vatican Politics. In 1700, a papal conclave was convened following the death of Innocent XII. It ended with the election of Giovanni Albani as Pope Clement XI. There was a real push by many cardinals to elect a Spanish pope, which would clearly create more cause and crisis in the War of Spanish Succession. Calico Acts. The Calico Acts banned the import of cotton textiles into England, followed also by the restriction of sales of most cotton textiles. It was a form of economic protectionism largely in response to India, which dominated the world cotton markets at the time. The Acts were a precursor to the Industrial Revolution, where Britain eventually surpassed India as the world's leading textile manufacturer of the 19th century. Using these cards and these events to your advantage will help you in your quest for domination of the War of Spanish Succession. Stay tuned for our next installment, the War of Austrian Succession, where we take a look at the second faction war in Imperial Struggle. This is Legendary Tactics.